I'm going to show you how to do A through F on your graphing calculator practice. So first off, this is our given function that we need to use to figure out these questions. So first things first is going to the y equals and putting in your function. Next, we're going to go to zoom and then press 6 for standard. And as you could see, nothing is there, so we need to adjust that window, which is question A. So we're going to go again to zoom and then down to zoom out, and we're going to hit that a couple times until you can see the graph. So already we're starting to see something. Let's just hit it one more time. And there you go. There's your graph. But I'm going to go to trace so we can kind of figure out where it is. So this bottom point down here seems to be at about a negative 100. And over here we start seeing it go all the way to 45 on the x-axis. We also have to take into consideration that question E requires us to have a y of at least 700, so we're also going to have to take that into account when we're making our window. So let's go back over here. And so for the x minimum, I'm going to go to negative 10, just because there isn't a lot past that y-axis. And for our x max, I'm going to go to about 70, just to be safe with that extra 20 that we already saw, considering it's going up and going to get even wider. For our y minimum, I'm going to go to about 200, negative 200, so that we have a good kind of buffer point between the bottom and our minimum, because we already know that this graph is going to be really squished together because we're going to have a y all the way up to 700. Which leads us to our y max, which I'm going to put as 1,000. So we really have a good view of how high our y's are getting. And then let's go back over to graph. And see, this is a really good view. You can see everything that you're going to need. And this will be your answer to A. So you can just write all of this stuff down. That'll be your final answer. So we can move on to B, which is finding our zeros. So for this, let's look back at this graph. So these intersections on the x-axis are going to be our zeros. So for that, we're going to go to second and then the trace button, which is our calculate. And you just go down to 0. And for this, it's going to ask you to go left bound, so left of that crossing on the x-axis. There we go. Right. There we go. Guess, doesn't matter. Just press enter. And then you have your first 0, which is at x equals 20. To find your second 0, it's going to be the same thing, going back to that calculate and 0 and putting in left, then right. So we've got our second 0, which is going to be at x equals 40 and y equals 0. So you can just put x equals 40. And that is your answer for B. Moving on to C, we need to find our minimum. So go to calculate again and go down to minimum. And it'll basically ask you the same thing as when you were finding those zeros. So left, then right, then just press enter. And you've got your minimum being at about 30, negative 100. And there's your minimum and answer to C. So D, we're actually going to go over to the table button, which is just the second and then graph. You could see I already have it put in, but you need to enter 4.8 because we're trying to find the value of that y at 4.8. And for that, you can just do clear and then 4.8. And it'll show up right here. And so that is going to be your answer for D, which is just y equals 535.04. For E, we're going to go to this y equals, and it's good that we already put in our y max so high because we're going to need that having been really high because we're going to need to know our x values when y equals 700. So let's just go over to graph, and you see you've got this line at 700. So these two are points, intersections, are going to be when your function equals 700. So to find the values of those x's, you're going to go to your calculate again, and you're going to go down this time to intersect. And it'll ask you for the first curve, which is your first line, and you're going to get close to that intersection there. There's your first one. The second curve, it should already be pretty close, and then enter for guess. And there's your first intersection and your first x value. So you can put that as x equals negative 1.716, just to round that off there. And you're going to do the exact same thing with the second one. And there is your second x value intersection there. X equals 58.284. Once again, rounding off that number there. And so those are your answers, A through E. And so now I'm actually going to go to quit just so we can go back into graph and get just a plain graph here. This you're going to have to copy down for F on a piece of paper and then label your minimum as well as your zeros. And so I've already done that right here. You can see that I've made this graph, so it should look like this, and you're going to label the points down here, here, and here.